She did not mean it. It was just a careless joke tossed into the warm, giggling air of Lady Portia Wren's drawing room, where 4 young women had gathered to escape the rain and the suffocating expectations of the season. The afternoon had grown lazy and sweet, full of laughter and half-eaten biscuits, and Mirabel Holt had said it the way anyone says something foolish when they are comfortable and safe and not thinking at all. "I'll kiss the first man who walks through that door." The room erupted. Her friends laughed so hard that tea nearly spilled. Someone grabbed a cushion and pressed it to her face. Mirabel herself was laughing, one hand pressed to her chest, cheeks flushed, completely unbothered. Then the door opened. The laughter stopped. Every single sound in that room died at once, like a candle snuffed by cold wind. He did not rush in. He did not stumble or knock. He simply walked through the doorway the way powerful men always do, like the room had been waiting for him, and he knew it. Tall, dark-haired, shoulders that filled the frame, eyes the color of a winter storm, a jaw carved from something harder than stone, the Duke of Ashenvale, the most untouchable man in all of England. Mirabel's smile froze on her face. Her friends turned to look at her, slowly, all at once, the kind of look that said, "You said what you said." The Duke's eyes swept the room and then, without warning, landed on her. He raised one dark eyebrow, and Mirabel Holt, a woman who had never in her life backed down from anything, felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. What happened next changed everything, not just for her, for him too, though he would never admit it. Not yet. Now here is what I want you to think about before the story begins. If you made that same joke and that same man walked in, would you keep your word or would you run? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. It genuinely helps more than you know. And if this story is already pulling at something in your chest, please hit that subscribe button for us, because this is only the beginning, and trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. The morning Mirabel Holt nearly ruined her entire future began the way most disasters do, quietly and without warning. She woke before the household stirred, which was not unusual for her. Mirabel had always been an early riser, a habit her mother called unladylike, and her father had once called the only sensible thing about her. She sat at the edge of her bed in the pale grey light, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and stared at the letter that had arrived the night before, and had not let her sleep since. It was from her uncle, Lord Gideon Holt, the man who controlled every penny of her inheritance until she married. The letter was short. It was always short with him. Short and sharp, like a blade wrapped in fine paper. He had written that if she did not secure an engagement before the close of the season, he would redirect her inheritance entirely to her cousin, Bernard Holt, a man with the personality of damp wool and the moral compass of a London fog. Bernard already knew about the letter. He had sent his own note 2 days before, cheerful and poisonous in equal measure, congratulating her on her coming destitution. Mirabel folded both letters and pushed them under her pillow. Then she got up, dressed herself without ringing for her maid, and went downstairs to eat breakfast alone before anyone else could look at her with pity. The Holt townhouse on Grevonmore Street was handsome and well kept, a narrow 4-story building sandwiched between 2 larger ones, like a quiet person at a loud party. Mirabel's father, Sir Thomas Holt, had died 3 years earlier, leaving behind a warm memory, a modest estate in Hampshire, a mountain of debt that had been quietly cleared, and a daughter who had inherited his brown eyes, his stubbornness, and his unfortunate tendency to speak before thinking. Her mother, Lady Constance Holt, was still asleep. Lady Constance slept late and rose dramatically, arriving at breakfast as though she were making an entrance at a ball. She was a gentle woman, but an anxious one, and Mirabel had long since learned not to share her problems with her mother unless she wanted them returned to her threefold, wrapped in worry and perfume. So Mirabelle ate her toast alone, read the morning paper without absorbing a single word, and by the time the clock struck 9, she had made a decision. She would go to Portia's. Lady Portia Fenwick was Mirabelle's oldest and most chaotic friend. They had grown up 3 houses apart, gotten into more trouble than either of them had ever confessed to their families, and maintained a friendship that had survived 4 seasons, 2 broken engagements, 1 incident involving a runaway horse, and a truly spectacular argument about whether Lord Byron was romantic or simply exhausting. Portia was funny, warm, occasionally reckless, and the only person in London who could make Mirabelle laugh until she forgot she was supposed to be worried. She arrived at Portia's townhouse just past 10 and found her friend already dressed and in excellent spirits, which meant something entertaining had happened or was about to. "Mirabelle," Portia said, grabbing her hand the moment she stepped through the door, "you are exactly who I needed. Come upstairs. Thomasine and Blythe are already here, and I have the most ridiculous story about Lord Fenwick's cousin and a chandelier." Mirabelle laughed before she even knew what she was laughing at, and let herself be pulled up the stairs. The drawing room on the first floor was Portia's favorite room in the house, and it showed. It was warm and slightly cluttered, full of books stacked sideways, embroidery abandoned mid-stitch, 3 different flower arrangements in various states of freshness, and 2 very comfortable settees that had hosted more honest conversations than any confessional in London. A fire crackled in the grate. Rain tapped softly at the windows. The grey morning outside made the room feel even more golden by contrast. Thomasine. Alcott was curled in the window seat with a cup of tea, her copper hair pinned up in a style that suggested she had attempted elegance, and then changed her mind halfway through. She was the quietest of the 4 of them, sharp-minded and observant, the kind of person who noticed everything and said only 1/3 of what she thought. She smiled when Mirabelle came in and shifted to make room, though Mirabelle chose the settee instead. Blythe Carrow was standing at the mantelpiece, gesturing with a teacup in a way that was genuinely dangerous, already in the middle of a sentence. Blythe was always in the middle of a sentence. She was tall, fair-haired, perpetually enthusiastic, and possessed of an energy that Mirabelle had once described as what happens when a spring morning becomes a person. She was also, beneath all that brightness, one of the most genuinely kind people Mirabelle had ever known. "And then," Blythe was saying, teacup still waving, "he told Lady Drummond that he had written her a poem, and she said, 'Read it then.' And he opened the paper, and it was blank. Completely blank. He had forgotten to write it." Portia collapsed onto the other settee, laughing. Thomasine pressed her lips together in the way she did when she found something funny but wanted to appear composed. Mirabelle sat down, accepted the cup of tea that appeared from somewhere, and felt the knot in her chest loosen just slightly. They talked for an hour about nothing important and everything necessary. The season's gossip moved through the room like weather, warm and swift. There was talk of Lord Ashdown's engagement to a girl from Bath. There was talk of the Duchess of Pemford's new carriage, so grand that people stopped in the street to stare. There was talk of the Heartley sisters, all 5 of them now out, causing their mother to appear simultaneously triumphant and exhausted at every social function. Then Blythe said, in the airy, throwaway manner of someone lobbing a stone without looking, "Have you all heard that the Duke of Ashenvale has returned to London?" The temperature of the room did not change, but something shifted anyway. Thomasine looked up from her tea. Portia went slightly still. Mirabelle kept her expression neutral through an effort she hoped did not show. "Has he?" she said. "Apparently he arrived 2 days ago," Blythe continued, settling into the armchair with the satisfied air of someone delivering excellent theatre. "Came back from his estate in Northumberland. No explanation given naturally, because he never explains anything. He is expected at the Caldwell musical on Thursday, and every unmarried woman in London is apparently having a quiet crisis about it." "Every unmarried woman except the sensible ones," Thomasine said, without inflection. "The sensible ones are having the quietest crisis," Portia said, and looked at Mirabel. Mirabel took a sip of her tea. The Duke of Ashenvale, Caius Deverell, 28 years old, holder of one of the oldest titles in England, owner of 3 estates, and possessor of a face and a manner that had made half the aristocracy lose their good sense at one point or another. He was also cold, private, occasionally cutting, and famously uninterested in marriage despite enormous pressure from every direction. He had been in London briefly at the start of the season, attended 3 events, said very little, and then disappeared north without explanation. Mirabel had met him twice. Both times had been brief. Both times had left her with the unsettling feeling of having stood too close to something that could burn. She did not intend to think about him further. "Well," she said, setting down her cup, "I imagine the sensible ones will survive the crisis, as they always do." Portia smiled in a way that said she was filing that response away for later examination. The rain outside grew heavier. Someone rang for more tea and biscuits. The conversation moved on to other things, lighter things, and the afternoon folded itself around the 4 of them like something comfortable and safe. It was an hour later, when they were all pleasantly tired from laughing, that Portia said with theatrical suspense, gesturing at the drawing-room entrance, "I wonder who will walk through that door next." And Mirabel, warm and comfortable and not thinking carefully, grinned and said, without a single thought for consequences, "Whoever it is, I'll kiss the first man who walks through that door." The room dissolved into laughter. Blythe shrieked and grabbed a cushion. Thomasine made a sound that was almost undignified. Portia pointed at her, like she had just confessed to a crime. Mirabel was laughing too, hands raised, entirely unbothered, because it was a joke. Obviously it was a joke. No man was going to walk through Portia's drawing-room door on a rainy Tuesday morning. The door opened. Portia's butler Graves stepped in first, and behind him, because apparently the universe had decided that Tuesday was the day to completely dismantle Mirabel Holt's life, walked a man. Not just any man. Caius Deverell, the Duke of Ashenvale, in the flesh, in Portia's drawing-room, on a rainy Tuesday morning when he had absolutely no reason to be there. He was taller than she remembered. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain. His eyes, that impossible grey that sat somewhere between storm and steel, moved across the room with the calm assessment of someone used to walking into places and taking measure of them instantly. They landed on Mirabel. She had not moved. She was still in the exact position she had been in when she made the joke, sitting forward slightly, one hand raised, laughter still printed on her face, even though the sound had stopped completely. The room was absolutely silent. Caius Deverell raised one dark eyebrow. Graves cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I beg your pardon. I was directing His Grace to Lord Fenwick upstairs, but I fear I took the wrong corridor." Nobody responded to Graves. Every eye in that room was on Mirabel. She felt Blythe stop breathing. She felt Portia go dangerously still. She felt Thomasine watching from the window seat with the quiet attention of someone who had already understood that this moment was going to matter and was paying it the respect it deserved. Later, she would tell Portia it was stubbornness. She would tell Blythe it was pride. She would tell Thomasine it was simply the natural conclusion of a statement made in front of witnesses. All of those things were true. But the real reason, the one she kept to herself for a long time afterward, was simpler and more frightening than any of them. She looked at Caius Deverell, standing in that doorway with one eyebrow raised and the full weight of his presence pressing quietly into the room, and something in her recognized something in him, wordless and swift and entirely inconvenient, and she decided in the space of a single breath that she was not a woman who said things she didn't mean. She set down her teacup. She stood up. She walked across the room. Every step was deliberate and even. She did not look away from him. He did not look away from her. His expression had gone very still, not cold, not warm, something suspended between the two, like a man watching something extraordinary happen and not yet certain whether to stop it. She stopped directly in front of him. He was much taller at this distance. She tilted her head back and met his eyes without flinching. Then, in front of Portia, Blythe, Thomasine, Graves, and whatever version of fate had orchestrated this entire morning, Mirabel Holt rose onto her toes, took the Duke of Ashenvale's face gently between both hands, and kissed him. It was not a timid kiss. It was not an accident or a stumble, or something she could later claim had been misinterpreted. It was 4 full seconds of deliberate, warm, unambiguous contact, her lips against his, her hands against his jaw, her decision entirely her own. His lips were still beneath hers, not pulling away, not responding, simply present, the way a caught breath is present, held and aware, and not yet released. Then she stepped back. She lowered her hands. She smoothed her skirt. She looked up at him with the composure of a woman who had absolutely no idea what she had just done to her own life and was refusing to show it. His face was unreadable. Completely, utterly unreadable. Not angry, not amused, not embarrassed. Something far deeper and far quieter than any of those things. Something that lived underneath expression entirely and had not yet decided whether to surface. He said nothing. Not one word. He looked at her for one long moment that stretched like pulled thread. Then he turned to Graves, said, "Take me to Lord Fenwick," in a voice that betrayed absolutely nothing, and walked out of the room. The door closed. Silence. Then Blythe made a sound that was not a word in any language, but communicated everything. Portia stood up very slowly from the settee, both hands pressed to her mouth, eyes enormous. Thomasine set down her tea with the deliberate care of someone who needed something to do with her hands. Mirabel stood exactly where she was in the middle of the room. Her heart was doing something violent and complicated inside her chest. Her hands, which had been steady a moment ago, were now not entirely steady. Her face was calm. She was keeping her face calm through an act of will, so concentrated it was almost painful. "Well," she said, into the silence. "Well," Portia echoed, in a voice barely above a whisper. "You kissed him," Blythe said, with the reverence of someone describing a natural disaster they had personally witnessed. "I said I would," Mirabel said. "You kissed the Duke of Ashenvale," Thomasine said, precisely and without drama, in the manner of someone reading a historical record aloud. "Yes." "In front of witnesses?" "Yes." "And he said nothing," Portia said slowly, working through it the way you work through something that has not yet fully resolved into sense. "He said nothing," Mirabel confirmed. The fire crackled. The rain continued outside, indifferent and steady. Somewhere above them, footsteps moved along the corridor toward Callum Fenwick's study. The Duke's footsteps. Even those were measured and unhurried. Mirabel sat back down on the settee. She picked up her tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. "He will forget it," she said. "He is a duke. He has seen stranger things." No one in the room agreed with her. No one disagreed either. They simply looked at her with the careful, knowing expressions of people who understood that some things, once done, cannot be unremembered by anyone in the room, least of all the person who did them. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, Mirabel Holt sat with her cold tea and her steady hands, and the feeling, quiet and persistent as the rain, that Caius Deverell was not going to forget it at all. She was right. He said nothing. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the kiss itself, though that lived in her chest with the stubborn permanence of something burned rather than written. Not the silence of the room afterward, or Portia's enormous eyes, or Graves clearing his throat with the strained professionalism of a man trying very hard to have seen nothing. It was the Duke's silence specifically, The way he had looked at her for one long, unreadable moment, turned to Graves, and walked out as though his legs had not received the message that something extraordinary had just happened. Mirabelle had held her composure through the rest of the afternoon at Portia's, which she considered one of the finer achievements of her life. She had drunk more tea, listened to Blythe describe the kiss with increasing theatrical embellishment, and left at 4 o'clock with her chin up and her face arranged into the expression of a woman who had done an unusual thing and found it entirely manageable. She held the expression all the way home. She held it through dinner with her mother, who noticed nothing. She held it until the candle went out and the dark arrived, and the thoughts came one after another, like uninvited guests who had heard there was room. By morning, she had decided. She was not going to think about it anymore. She had an inheritance to secure, a deadline that did not care about kissed dukes, and a future that needed building. She got up, dressed, and went down to breakfast with the focused composure of a woman who had a plan. The plan lasted until Portia arrived at 9:30. "Callum told me what the Duke said before he left," Portia announced, sitting forward without preamble. "He asked whether you were a frequent visitor to the house. That was all he said. One question, Mirabelle. That man does not ask questions he does not intend to act on." Mirabelle looked at the window. He was curious. Anyone would be curious. "He is coming to the Caldwell musical Thursday," Portia said. "So are you." "I know." Portia smiled with the quiet worry of a woman who could see trouble arriving from a considerable distance. The Caldwell musical was everything Lady Caldwell's events always were, precise and elegant and perfectly arranged. Mirabelle arrived with her mother, found her friends already seated, and spent the first half of the program looking at her program rather than at the room. She knew the moment he arrived without needing to look. The air shifted. It always shifted when he entered. "He is here," Blythe whispered. Mirabelle kept reading her program. "He is looking at you," Thomasine said, with the calm neutrality of a weather report. Mirabelle put the program down and looked up and across the room. The Duke of Ashenvale was already looking at her, steady and direct, and completely unbothered about being caught doing it. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then Lady Caldwell called for attention, and the music began. At the interval, he crossed the room to her. "I wanted to return something," he said, stopping 2 feet away with a glass held loosely in one hand. "I beg your pardon?" "Your composure. You left it in Fenwick's drawing room on Tuesday." Mirabelle laughed, a real one, brief and bright, entirely unmanaged. He watched it happen with an expression that did something brief and complicated before resettling. "Are you going to tell anyone?" she asked. "That depends," he said, "on whether you regret it." She held his gaze. "No," she said plainly, "I do not." Something moved in his face, deep and quiet, underneath the composure, like a current beneath still water. Before either of them could say anything further, Lady Caldwell called everyone back, and the interval ended, and he inclined his head and stepped away. Mirabelle returned to her seat and heard not a single note of the second half. The Heartley ball was Saturday, and Mirabelle intended to use it. She had a plan. Speak to suitable men, dance with the promising ones, move forward with the practical business of her future. She told Portia the plan on Wednesday morning. Portia listened. Then she said, "He told you he is not going to tell anyone. You told him you do not regret it, and your response is to go talk to other men." "Yes," Mirabelle said. "You are the bravest and most cowardly person I know," Portia said, with complete affection. Then Blythe arrived with news. She sat down, took a cup of tea she did not drink, and said, "Lady Saraphina Montclair has returned from France. She will be at the Heartley ball, with the Duke. He is escorting her." The room went quiet in a specific way. Lady Saraphina Montclair, daughter of the Marquess of Halford, extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily composed. Before she left for France 2 years ago, There had been a rumour of an understanding between her and the Duke. Never confirmed, never denied. Mirabelle set down her cup carefully. "It is of no consequence to me," she said pleasantly. No one agreed. No one disagreed. They gave her the dignity of her own pretense. Saturday came too quickly. Heartley House was magnificent, lit from ground to roofline, the ballroom full of flowers and candlelight, and the full assembled force of London society in its most decorated form. Mirabelle arrived, focused and composed, and immediately got to work. She spoke to Mr. Aldous Graves from Shropshire, pleasant and steady. She danced with Lord Tiverton, who talked exclusively about horses. She danced with Mr. Percival Oakes, who was charming and secretly engaged to someone else. She returned to Thomasine at the edge of the room, feeling the evening slipping past without producing anything useful. Then the room shifted. She looked toward the entrance. The Duke walked in. And beside him was the most striking woman Mirabelle had seen in any ballroom all season. Lady Saraphina. Montclair was everything the rumours had failed to adequately prepare her for. Tall, dark-haired, sharp-boned and brilliant-eyed, with a composure so complete it looked architectural. She moved beside the Duke with the easy familiarity of someone who had the right to that position and had never once questioned it. The room noticed them both immediately. Lady Seraphina's eyes swept the ballroom with swift, intelligent precision and stopped briefly on Mirabelle. 1 second. No expression changes, but something in that second told Mirabelle with absolute clarity that this woman knew exactly who she was. Mirabelle held the look and then glanced away first, not from weakness, simply because she had nothing to prove. She turned back to the room and kept working. She talked to Mrs. Grantley about her sensible son. She accepted champagne and stood near the tall windows and breathed and told herself firmly that the Duke's arrangements were his own business. Then across the ballroom he looked up and found her, directly, without searching, the way you find something you already know the location of. He held her gaze, and what she saw in his face across that candle-lit, crowded room was not warmth and not coldness, but something underneath both. Something unresolved and pressing, like a man who had made a decision and had not yet acted on it. Then Lady Seraphina spoke beside him, and he turned, and the moment closed. Mirabelle set down her champagne and walked to the terrace. She needed air. She needed silence. She needed 3 minutes away from her own face. The terrace was cool and stone-flagged, lit by swaying lanterns, bordered by dark, climbing greenery. She walked to the balustrade and put her hands on the cold stone and looked at the dark garden below and breathed. The door opened behind her. "If you are here to tell me to go back inside," she said, assuming Portia, "I will be in shortly." "I was not going to tell you that," said a voice that was not Portia. She turned. The Duke stepped through the door and walked toward her with his usual, unhurried certainty, and stopped at the balustrade 2 feet away. "You followed me," she said. "I needed air." "So did I." "Then we have something in common." She looked at him. The lantern light caught the clean line of his profile. She could see the tension in his jaw, the effort beneath the stillness. "You have a guest this evening," she said, and wished she had not. He turned to face her. "Seraphina's father asked me to escort her. They were close with my family. She is here for 3 weeks only, and returning to Paris to finalize an engagement to a French count." He paused. "I am telling you because you deserve to know it, not because you asked." Mirabelle held his gaze. The garden was dark and still below them. "I have been thinking about Tuesday," he said quietly. "So have I," she said, before she could stop herself. He turned fully toward her then, and what replaced the composure on his face was the thing that comes just before warmth, the very first edge of it. "I said nothing when you kissed me," he said. "I left without a word. and I have regretted that silence every day since Tuesday." Her breath moved quietly and without permission. "What would you have said?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment that had weight to it rather than length. "I would have said," he answered, "that I walked through that door first. And I would have asked whether that meant something to you." The words settled between them in the cool night air, clear and irreversible. Mirabelle opened her mouth. The terrace door flew open, and Blythe appeared, urgent and breathless. "Mirabelle, your mother told Lady Pemberton her hat looks like a frightened bird, and Lady Pemberton has taken serious offence, and it is becoming a situation." Mirabelle closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She looked at the Duke. He looked at her. The warmth was still there in his face, patient and unhurried, like something that had decided it could wait. "Excuse me," she said. She followed Blythe inside and felt his gaze on her back all the way through the door, steady as a hand she had not yet taken. The situation with Lady Pemberton was resolved in 12 minutes. Mirabelle applied a sincere apology on her mother's behalf, 2 glasses of water, and her most diplomatic conversation about the genuine artistry of elaborate headwear. Lady Pemberton softened. Lady Constance was guided gently to a chair with a plate of small sandwiches. Crisis over. Mirabelle straightened, smoothed her skirt, and walked back into the ballroom. The Duke had come back inside too. He was across the room now, in conversation with Lord Haverstock and Sir Edmund Roe, 2 serious-faced peers who were clearly discussing something that had nothing to do with the evening's entertainment. He did not look up when she re-entered. She told herself she had not checked. She returned to the task of the evening with fresh discipline. She found Mrs. Grantley again, and was introduced at last to the sensible son, Mr. Frederick Grantley, a man of 30 with steady eyes and a quiet manner and genuine interest in everything she said. He was good. She noticed that he was good. She danced with him and found the conversation easy and the company pleasant, and the whole thing entirely lacking in whatever unnamed quality made her pulse move. The way it moved when a certain person looked at her across a room. She danced again with Callum Fenwick, who appeared from somewhere full of good spirits and cheerful obliviousness, and who told her 3 funny stories in a row without requiring anything from her except laughter, which she gave freely and meant. Portia found her near the supper room at 10:30. "Frederick Grantley," Portia said, without greeting. "I saw you dancing. He is very pleasant." "He is. He is also genuinely good, which is rarer." Portia looked at her carefully. "What happened on the terrace?" Mirabelle was quiet for a moment. Around them the ball moved and hummed and glittered, entirely indifferent to the conversation happening at its edge. She thought about the lantern light and the cool stone, and the weight of what he had said, standing in the dark beside her. "He told me about Lady Saraphina," she said, "that she is leaving for Paris. That is only a courtesy. And he said he regretted saying nothing on Tuesday." She paused. "He said he would have asked whether it meant something." Portia was very still for a moment. Then she said softly, "Mirabelle, I know. That is not a small thing for a man like him to say. I know that too. Then what are you going to do?" Mirabelle looked out at the ballroom. Frederick Grantley was near the refreshment table, talking to someone, easy and undemanding. The Duke was on the opposite side of the room, still with the older men, his profile clean and still in the candlelight. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. Portia squeezed her arm and said nothing more, which was exactly the right thing. It was during the last dance of the evening that the Duke came to stand beside her at the edge of the floor. Not asking, not announcing, simply arriving, the way he did everything, with the quiet certainty of a man who had decided where he was going to be. "You are not dancing," he said. "Nor are you." He was quiet for a moment, watching the couples move past in the slow, formal measure of the final waltz. Then he said without looking at her, "I owe you an apology." She turned to look at him. "For what?" "For saying nothing on Tuesday. You did something that required courage, and I stood there and gave you silence." He paused, and she could see it cost him something to say. The slight tension in his jaw. The effort of a man not used to offering this kind of thing. "That was not well done for me." Mirabelle looked at him for a long moment. The candlelight moved across his face, and she could see, beneath the composure, something genuinely open, something that had put down its armor for the moment, and was standing quietly without it. "You came back," she said, "on the terrace tonight. You came back and you said the thing you should have said on Tuesday." She held his gaze. "That counts for something." He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to learn, the one that lived just beneath everything visible, the one that was more honest than anything his face usually permitted. "Miss Holt," he said quietly, "would you ride with me tomorrow morning? Hyde Park, 8 o'clock. Not a performance, not a social occasion, just a ride." Every sensible thought told her to think carefully. She had Frederick Grantley, who was good and steady and available. She had her deadline and her uncle and her future to build. She had every practical reason in the world to smile politely and say she had a prior engagement. She said, 8 o'clock. Something settled in his face. Not triumph. Quieter than that. Something that looked very much like relief, finding somewhere to rest. The music ended. The room began to move. He inclined his head, stepped back, and was absorbed into the crowd. Portia appeared at Mirabelle's elbow within 30 seconds. What did he say? "He apologized," Mirabelle said, "and invited me riding tomorrow morning." Portia made a sound that was not words but contained everything. "I said yes," Mirabelle added. "I know you did," Portia said. "I could tell from your face before you opened your mouth." They rode at 8 the next morning, and the park was quiet and pale and cool, the kind of morning that belongs to early risers and people with things to think through. He arrived exactly on time, which she had expected. He helped her mount without making a ceremony of it, which she appreciated. They rode side by side along the quieter paths, where the trees were thick and the sounds of the city were muffled and distant. He talked. That surprised her. She had expected the silence he seemed to wear like a coat, but instead, he talked, not abundantly, not in the easy social way of men performing charm, but in the carefully considered way of someone who chose his words, because he meant them, and not for any other reason. He talked about Northumberland, about his estate there, about the way the land changed in winter in a way that London never did. He asked her about Hampshire, about her father, and listened to the answers with the full attention of someone genuinely interested. She found herself talking more than she intended to, about her father's laugh, about the garden at the Hampshire house that had always been slightly too ambitious for the space, about the particular loneliness of a season that asks you to perform yourself for an audience of strangers. He was quiet for a moment after that. Then he said, "You do not perform. That is the first thing I noticed about you." She looked at him. In Portia's drawing room. "Before that," he said, "at the Ashmore dinner at the start of the season. You were at the other end of the table, and you disagreed with something Lord Crofton said, and you said so, plainly, without softening at first." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Lord Crofton looked as though he had been mildly struck by furniture. Mirabelle laughed. "I remember that dinner." "I thought about you afterward," he said, simply and without decoration. "I did not expect to see you again so specifically." She held his gaze across the space between their horses. The morning light came through the trees in long pale shafts, and the park was entirely quiet around them, and she felt, suddenly and completely, the particular danger of this, of how easy it was, of how right the morning felt, of how much she had stopped thinking about deadlines and letters and uncles, and was simply here, simply present, simply herself beside a man who apparently remembered her from a dinner she had not known he was paying attention at. "You should know," she said carefully, "that I have reasons to be practical this season. Reasons that do not leave much room for things that are uncertain." He looked at her. "Tell me the reasons." So she did. She told him about the letter and her uncle and Bernard and the deadline and the inheritance and all of it, plainly and without apology, because she had always found it easier to say true things plainly, and because, if this morning was going to mean anything, it needed to be built on something honest. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, watching the path ahead. Then he said, "I am not uncertain." 3 words, quiet and direct, and carrying the full weight of a man who did not say things he did not mean. Mirabel looked at him. The morning sat around them, still and pale and waiting. She did not say anything, but she did not look away either. And he smiled. Fully, finally, completely, the first real smile she had seen on his face, and it was the most dangerous thing she had encountered all season, because it made him look like an entirely different person, and she liked that person enormously and immediately, and without any room left for sense. They rode back in, companionable quiet, and he handed her down from her horse at the park gate with the same unhurried care he brought to everything and said, "Tomorrow, the Darnley breakfast." It was not a question. "Tomorrow," she agreed. She walked home through the pale morning and did not think about Frederick Grantley once.
The roses are in fine bloom today. Indeed, the Darnleys have outdone themselves. One must appreciate the effort.
And the company, of course.
Naturally.
The Darnley breakfast was the kind of social event that sounded modest and was not. Lord and Lady Darnley hosted 30 guests in their garden on a clear morning, which meant 30 people watching each other with great interest while pretending to admire the roses. It was intimate enough that arrivals were noted, pairings were visible, and the absence of distance between 2 people was the kind of thing that got discussed over dinner tables across Mayfair the same evening. Mirabel knew this. She arrived with Portia and Thomasine and told herself she was simply attending a breakfast, and that was all. The Duke arrived 20 minutes after her, which was long enough that she had settled into a conversation with Colonel Hargrove and was genuinely engaged in it. She felt him arrive the way she always felt him arrive, that quiet, atmospheric shift, and kept her attention on the Colonel, who was telling her about the Italian countryside with the vivid authority of someone who had loved a place deeply and missed it every day since leaving. Then he was beside her, not interrupting, simply present, waiting with the patience of a man who was good at waiting. Colonel Hargrove glanced at him, recognized him, and with the instinctive deference of a military man before a duke, excused himself with admirable tact. "Good morning," the Duke said. "Good morning," she returned. They walked the garden path together, and the morning was warm and the roses were extravagant, and 2 separate people watched them pass with expressions they were not entirely managing. Mirabel noted this and said nothing about it. He noted it too, she could tell, and said nothing either, which felt like a kind of agreement. He brought her a cup of tea from the table near the garden wall. He remembered how she took it, which she had not told him, which meant he had paid attention at some previous occasion she had not registered. She looked at the cup and then at him, and he met her eyes with the calm, unhurried look of a man who was not embarrassed about having noticed things. They talked for an hour. It was the easiest hour she had spent in 4 seasons. Portia watched from across the garden with an expression of deeply satisfied restraint. It was nearly 11 when Lady Saraphina Montclair arrived. She came with her mother, Lady Halford, a formidable woman who moved through social events with the ease of someone who had been doing it for 40 years and found them all identical in the ways that mattered. Lady Seraphina beside her was flawless, composed, and dressed with the particular elegance of a woman who had spent 2 years in Paris and absorbed everything available. She crossed the garden directly, not toward the hosts, not toward the refreshment table, directly toward the Duke, with the straight, unhurried purpose of someone who had arrived with a specific intention and saw no reason to obscure it. "Caius," she said, warmly and with the easy use of his name that indicated long familiarity. He turned. "Saraphina." His tone was warm but measured, the warmth of an old acquaintance rather than anything else. Lady Seraphina's eyes moved to Mirabel. She smiled. It was a perfectly constructed smile, gracious and controlled, the kind that contained a message in its architecture for anyone paying close enough attention. "Miss Holt," she said, "what a pretty morning." "It is," Mirabel agreed, pleasantly and without armor. What happened next was so smoothly done that Mirabel almost missed the mechanism of it. Lady Seraphina turned to the Duke and said, "I must speak with you about something my father asked me to relay. It is rather time-sensitive. Would you walk with me for a moment?" And she said it in the tone of something practical and familial, something that left no polite room for him to decline, and she placed her hand on his arm with the light, familiar ease of someone exercising a right so old it needed no announcement. He glanced at Mirabel. She smiled, easy and unbothered, the best smile she had. "Of course," she said, to no one specifically, and turned back toward Colonel Hargrove, who had reappeared nearby. They walked away. Mirabel talked to the Colonel. She was good at talking. She used every skill she had, and the Colonel was an excellent subject, and the conversation was genuinely interesting, and she was perfectly fine. From the corner of her eye, she watched Lady Seraphina walk the path with the Duke and lean slightly toward him as she spoke, and touched his arm a second time, lighter this time, more deliberate, the kind of touch that looked like nothing and meant everything. She watched the Duke listen with his customary stillness. She watched him nod once. She returned her full attention to Colonel Hargrove and asked him about Naples. Portia appeared at her side the moment the Colonel was claimed by someone else. "She is not in London for 3 weeks on her way to a French count," Portia said, low and urgent. Thomasine just spoke to Mrs. Alcott, who had it directly from Lady Halford. The engagement in Paris fell through 2 months ago. She is in London for the season. The full season. Mirabel went very still. "The Duke told me she was returning to Paris," she said quietly. "He may not know yet, or he was told what her father wanted him to be told." Portia's voice was careful. "Either way, Seraphina Montclair is here. She is free, and from what I just watched, she has absolutely no intention of letting this morning go to waste." Across the garden, Lady Seraphina laughed at something the Duke said. It was a beautiful laugh, controlled and musical, pitched at exactly the right volume. She tilted her head toward him slightly as she laughed, closing the distance between them by an inch, which was the only inch that mattered. The Duke did not step back. Mirabel watched this with a face she kept carefully pleasant, and a chest that was doing something she refused to name. "He told me he was not uncertain," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Then he will need to prove it," Portia said simply, "because she is very good at this, and she has history with him, and she has just discovered that she has a reason to fight for it." Mirabel set down her teacup. She straightened. She looked across the garden at Lady Seraphina, who chose that precise moment to look back at her, and the look between them was brief and clear and contained everything 2 women could say to each other without a single word. Then Lady Seraphina smiled again, turned back to the Duke, and placed her hand on his arm a 3rd time, and this time she did not remove it. Mirabel turned to Portia. "I need to think," she said. "I know," Portia said. "Alone. I know that too." She made her excuses to Lady Darnley with perfect grace, said warm goodbyes to the Colonel and to Thomasine, and to Blythe, who had appeared at some point and was watching her with worried eyes, and she walked out of the garden and into the street and down the quiet morning pavement alone. She walked for a long time. She thought about the letter under her pillow. She thought about Bernard. She thought about Frederick Grantley, who was good and steady and available and uncomplicated. She thought about the park this morning, and 3 words said quietly on a pale path, "I am not uncertain," and how much she had believed them when she heard them. She thought about Lady Seraphina's hand on the Duke's arm, and the inch of closed distance, and the smile aimed at her across a garden, like a very elegant declaration of war. She turned the corner onto Gravenmore Street and went home. She sat at her writing desk and looked at the blank paper in front of her for a long time. Then she heard the knock at the front door. She heard Dawson, their butler, open it. She heard a brief exchange of voices below. Then Dawson's footsteps on the stairs and his knock at her sitting-room door. "A note, Miss Holt," he said, presenting it on a small silver tray. "Delivered by hand." She looked at the paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar, clean and precise and slightly formal. She opened it. It said, simply, "The park this morning was not sufficient. I would like more time. If you are willing, I will call tomorrow at 2. If you are not, I will understand. But I think you should know that I have understood something this morning that I didn't understand before, and I would rather say it to your face than leave it as silence again." There was no signature. There did not need to be. Mirabel read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and held it in both hands, and sat very still for a long moment in the quiet of her sitting-room. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 1 word on a clean sheet of paper. "Yes." She sealed it, handed it to Dawson, and sat back in her chair. Outside, London moved and hummed and continued entirely without her input. Inside, something that had been pulled tight in her chest for days released itself, slowly, like a fist uncurling into an open hand. She did not think about Lady Seraphina again that evening. Not very much, anyway. He came at exactly 2 o'clock. Mirabel heard the knock from her sitting-room and took one quiet breath before standing. She checked nothing in the mirror. She smoothed nothing. She walked downstairs the way she had walked across Portia's drawing room on that Tuesday morning, evenly and with her eyes open, committed to whatever was about to happen. Dawson showed the Duke into the front sitting-room and withdrew with the practiced invisibility of a good butler. Lady Constance was out making calls, which Mirabel had not arranged but was profoundly grateful for. The Duke stood near the window when she entered. He turned when she came in and looked at her, the way he had been looking at her since the beginning, directly and without pretense, as though she was something he had decided deserved his full attention, and he was giving it without reservation. "You came," she said. "I said I would." She sat. He sat opposite. The room was quiet around them, the kind of quiet that happens when two people have arrived at a moment that has been building for some time, and both of them know it. "Your note said you understood something," she said. "This morning in the garden." He looked at her steadily. "I understood that watching you walk away from that garden was something I didn't want to repeat." He paused. "I also understood what Lady Seraphina was doing. I want you to know that I saw it clearly." Mirabel held his gaze. "She told you the Paris engagement fell through." Something moved in his face. "She told me this morning, yes, on the garden path. She told me, and then she said things that were kind and familiar, and that I think she meant genuinely." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and what she saw in his face now was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. "Seraphina and I have a long history. There was a time, years ago, when something might have grown between us. It did not. She went to France, and I understood that to be its conclusion. He paused. I should have told you the full picture sooner. I told you what I believed to be true about Paris. I did not know it had changed. I believe you, Mirabelle said, simply and immediately, because she did. He looked at her, as though that surprised him slightly, as though he had prepared for more resistance, and found none. She is going to make things complicated, Mirabelle said, because it was true, and there was no use in pretending otherwise. She may try, he said, but I am not a man who is moved by complications when I have already decided something. The room was very still. And what have you decided? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, and with the full weight of a man who chose every word deliberately, I decided it on a Tuesday morning in Portia Fenwick's drawing room, when a woman I had been thinking about since September walked across the room and kissed me in front of 4 witnesses, and then sat back down and picked up her tea as though she had simply done what needed doing. Something shifted in his face, warm and certain, and no longer held back. I decided that I had never in my life met anyone like her, and that silence was the worst mistake I had made in recent memory. Mirabelle looked at him. Her heart was doing something full and complicated, and she left it, because there was no box large enough for this, and no shelf high enough, and she was done pretending otherwise. For the record, she said, it was cold tea. He laughed, a real one, low and genuine, the kind that changed his whole face, and she felt the last of the distance between them dissolve like morning frost. He reached across and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, simply and directly, the way he did everything, and held it with the steady warmth of someone who had decided where his hand was going to be, and was not interested in taking it back. Your uncle's deadline, he said. Tell me exactly how long you have. 5 weeks, she said. Until the season closes. That is sufficient, he said. She raised her eyebrows. Sufficient for what, exactly? He met her eyes with an expression that was warm and certain, and faintly amused. For doing this properly. She looked at their joined hands, and then at his face, and felt something settle inside her that had not been settled in a very long time. Not just the deadline, not just the inheritance, everything. The weight she had been carrying since her father died, and the season began grinding, and the letters started arriving, all of it shifting slightly, making room for something that felt like genuine ground rather than the performed kind. She was still sitting with that feeling when the front door opened downstairs. Not Lady Constance. The footsteps were too quick and too purposeful, and accompanied by a voice she recognized with the specific, unpleasant clarity of someone whose voice you have heard in your nightmares. Bernard Holt, her cousin, in her house, on this specific afternoon. She and the Duke both heard it. She saw his eyes sharpen, Dawson's voice below, measured and correct, attempting to redirect. Bernard's voice, louder, the cheerful, unstoppable quality of a man who believed the house was already half his and was simply waiting for the paperwork. Then footsteps on the stairs. Mirabelle stood. The Duke stood with her, still holding her hand, which he had not released. The sitting-room door opened, and Bernard Holt walked in, round-faced and bright-eyed, and radiating the particular energy of a man arriving to survey something he expected to inherit, and he stopped dead in the doorway. He looked at Mirabelle. He looked at the Duke. He looked at their joined hands. His bright, cheerful expression underwent a rapid and extremely satisfying series of adjustments. "Cousin," Mirabelle said, with perfect pleasantness. "What an unexpected visit." Bernard opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the Duke again with the expression of a man whose entire plan had just walked into a wall at considerable speed. The Duke looked at Bernard with the cool, level regard of a man assessing something minor and finding it exactly as minor as expected. He did not release Mirabel's hand. "I don't believe we have been introduced," the Duke said, in the tone he used when he was being formally polite, and both parties knew it was a courtesy being extended rather than owed. Bernard swallowed. "Bernard Holt, Miss Holt's cousin." "I see," the Duke said. He said nothing further. He did not need to. The silence did the work entirely on its own. Bernard looked at Mirabel one more time, performed a rapid calculation behind his eyes, arrived at a conclusion, and said, with the deflated cheerfulness of a man retreating gracefully, "I only stopped to say hello. Passing through, I will not intrude." He backed toward the door. "Good afternoon." The door closed. Mirabel looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the Duke. "He will go straight to my uncle," she said. "Good," the Duke said simply. She looked at him. "Let him," he said. "Let your uncle know exactly what he is looking at. It will save time." Something warm moved through her chest. She looked at their joined hands again and thought about 5 weeks and deadlines and the particular relief of standing next to someone who was not afraid of the complicated parts. 3 days later, Lady Saraphina made her final attempt. It happened at the Pemford dinner, a gathering of 20 guests in the grand Pemford dining room, which was exactly the kind of intimate, high-visibility occasion that made everything said and done within it immediately available to the rest of London by the following morning. Lady Saraphina arrived looking magnificent. She had clearly decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it completely. She wore her finest, carried herself at her most formidable, and positioned herself near the Duke from the moment the guests gathered in the drawing room before dinner with the quiet, graceful determination of a woman executing a plan she had spent several days refining. Mirabel watched and said nothing, and kept her face pleasant. At dinner, Lady Saraphina was seated 3 places from the Duke. Close enough. During the second course, she addressed him directly, with the easy familiarity of their shared history, drawing him into a conversation that was warm and personal, and laced with references to things only the two of them would know, shared memories and family connections, and the particular intimacy of long acquaintance. She was very good. Mirabel, seated further down the table, could see exactly how good she was, and felt a grudging, complicated respect for the execution, even while everything inside her went tight and watchful. The Duke engaged. He was too well-mannered not to. He responded to her warmth with courtesy, and to her memories with acknowledgement, and to her familiarity with the measured reciprocation of someone who respected history without being governed by it. Then Lady Saraphina said, in a voice pitched low but not low enough, the voice of someone who intended to be overheard by precisely the right people, "I have been thinking, Caius, that we wasted a great deal of time. I think you know what I mean." The table did not go silent. It was more subtle than that. Conversations continued, but attention shifted, that fine social adjustment, ears tuning without heads turning. The Duke set down his fork. He looked at Lady Saraphina with the clear, steady, unambiguous gaze of a man about to say something he had already decided. "Saraphina," he said, quietly but without any effort to obscure it from the table, "I have the deepest respect for you, and genuine warmth for our history. But I think you know, as I know, that what you are describing is something we already had our answer to, a long time ago." He paused. "And I think you also know that my answer now is the same as it was then, and that it has recently become even clearer to me why." The table was very still. Lady Saraphina looked at him. Something moved across her face, real and briefly unguarded, and beneath the composure and the plan and the magnificent execution of the evening, Mirabel saw something that looked very much like a woman who had genuinely hoped and was now genuinely accepting that the hope was finished. It was painful to see, because it was honest, and Mirabel was not a woman who enjoyed watching someone else hurt, even when the situation required it. Then Lady Saraphina straightened. She picked up her wine glass. She smiled, and this smile was different from all the previous ones, because it was real. Small and slightly sad, and completely genuine. "Of course," she said simply, and turned to the guest on her other side and began a new conversation. And that was that. The dinner continued. The courses came and went. Conversation flowed back into its normal channels. Lord Pemford told a long story about a hunting trip that everyone pretended was shorter than it was. Lady Pemford said 3 things that were each more witty than the last, and accepted the resulting laughter with the composure of someone accustomed to it. Across the table, the Duke looked at Mirabelle. She looked back at him. He raised his wine glass, barely, the smallest possible gesture, private and direct, and meant for no one else in the room. She felt it in her chest like a warm hand pressed flat. After dinner, when the guests had separated into smaller conversations, and the rooms had loosened into the comfortable disorder of an evening winding down, Lady Saraphina found Mirabelle near the tall windows of the drawing-room. Mirabelle did not pretend to be surprised. She turned and met her directly. Lady Saraphina looked at her for a moment. Then she said, quietly and without performance, "He has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you. Not in all the years I have known him." She paused. "I wanted you to know that I saw it, and that I'm not the kind of woman who fights for something when the answer is already written." She smiled, small and real. "Be good to him. He is better than he allows most people to see." Then she walked away, back straight, head up, with the full dignity of a woman who had played well and lost gracefully, and intended to let neither define her. Mirabelle watched her go, and felt something complicated and genuine move through her. Something that was not triumph. Something quieter and more serious than that. She felt the Duke beside her before she heard him. "She came to speak to you," he said. "She did." "What did she say?" Mirabelle looked at him. The drawing-room moved around them, warm and golden, full of people and conversation, and the comfortable noise of an evening among people who had known each other a long time. She thought about Tuesday mornings and rainy drawing rooms, and a joke that was never supposed to mean anything, and a door that had opened at exactly the wrong and right moment. "She said you are better than you allow most people to see," Mirabelle told him. He was quiet for a moment. "She is not wrong," he said, with the dry, careful self-awareness of a man who had spent a long time being less than he could be, and knew it. "No," Mirabelle agreed. "She is not." He looked at her. "I intend to speak to your uncle this week." Her breath moved. "You are certain?" "I told you," he said simply. "I'm not uncertain." She looked at him. This man who had walked through a door on a Tuesday and changed the shape of everything, who had said nothing and then come back, who had been honest and patient and present in all the ways that mattered, whose smile she had seen exactly once and intended to spend a considerable amount of time seeing again. "Then speak to him," she said. He took her hand the way he had in her sitting room, simply and directly and without ceremony, and held it with the steady warmth of someone who had found where he was going to stand, and had no intention of moving. Around them the evening continued, full and warm and golden. Outside, London moved on as it always did, indifferent and magnificent, and entirely unaware that in a drawing-room in Mayfair, a woman who had made a careless joke on a Tuesday morning was standing with her hand in the hand of the man who had walked through the door first, and that both of them, finally, were exactly where they were supposed to be. The joke had not meant anything, until it meant everything. If this story moved something in you, tell us in the comments which moment hit hardest. Was it the kiss, the silence, or the moment he came back? Drop your answer below and tell us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it now. There is so much more coming, and you do not want to miss a single part.